Evelyn Hart's world had always been held together with duct tape and hope. By day, she served coffee at a local cafe with a practiced smile and tired eyes. By night, she cleaned office buildings long after the last suit had gone home. Every dollar she earned went to her mother's prescriptions, the rent, or the small tin can labeled dreams she kept hidden in her closet. She didn't need luxury. All she wanted was a simple life, a tiny bookstore of her own, and maybe, just maybe, peace. But peace was a luxury she could never afford. Her mother, Margaret Hart, had been everything to her, a former librarian who taught her to fall in love with words and worlds beyond their little town. They were best friends, soulmates in a way only mothers and daughters could be. But fate, as always, was cruel. It began with a flicker. The faulty outlet in the kitchen had sparked once before, but the landlord ignored her pleas. That night, Evelyn returned from work to the scent of burning plastic. The living room was already swallowed in flames. "Mom!" she screamed, dropping everything as she raced inside. Smoke filled her lungs as she stumbled through the firestorm, coughing, eyes stinging, heart racing. She found her mother unconscious in the hallway, too frail to escape on her own. Evelyn dragged her out just as the ceiling collapsed behind them. Sirens wailed. Red and blue lights painted the night. She held her mother's limp hand as paramedics tried everything. But it was too late. Margaret Hart died that night, not in a hospital bed, not in peace, but in the arms of her daughter, in the ashes of their life. Evelyn sat on the curb, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, face streaked with soot and tears. The fire marshal's voice was a blur. No insurance, no savings, no home. She had nothing. They said she could go to a shelter, but Evelyn couldn't hear them. She couldn't breathe. Her entire life had burned in front of her, and now she was just floating. She walked, for hours, through the sleeping streets of Charleston, past glowing windows filled with warmth she no longer had. Rain began to fall softly like the sky mourning with her. Her hands trembled. Her feet ached, but she didn't stop. By dawn, she found herself outside a closed bookstore, the same one her mother used to take her to as a child. The sign was faded now, the windows dusty, but it felt familiar, safe. She curled up on the cold stone steps, hugging her knees. Her mother's necklace, the one she always wore, pressed against her heart. It was all she had left, and she cried, silent, gasping sobs that racked her thin frame. She hadn't cried at the hospital. She hadn't cried when the fire took everything. But now, alone under the gray sky, Evelyn let it all out. Across town, the world moved on. Inside the lavish ballroom of Charleston's Grand Crest Hotel, the city's elite sipped champagne and donated checks with names they'd forget by morning. Glittering gowns twirled under chandeliers. Laughter echoed off marble walls. Grayson Wolfe stood at the edge of it all, exhausted. He was the host, the man of the hour, the tech prodigy turned millionaire real estate magnate who'd made headlines for buying up derelict properties and turning them into gold. But tonight, it all felt hollow. The charity gala was supposed to be for underprivileged women, but all he saw were entitled guests in designer clothes pretending to care. He'd shaken hands with people who once mocked his failures, smiled at women who only saw his bank account. He needed air. Grayson slipped out a side door, loosening the tie that choked him. The rain had slowed to a mist and the city felt quieter, softer. He walked aimlessly, letting the night clear his mind. That's when he saw her. A figure hunched on the steps of the old bookstore, barely a silhouette in the dim streetlight. As he drew closer, he saw the torn jeans, the soot-streaked skin, the way her golden hair clung to her wet cheeks. Her eyes were closed, but not in sleep, in exhaustion, in despair. Something tugged at his chest. She didn't look like a beggar. She looked like someone who'd been thrown into a storm and hadn't come back out. Without thinking, he slipped off his tailored coat and knelt beside her. "Miss?" he said softly. She flinched, startled awake. Her eyes met his, deep hazel and filled with pain. For a second, neither spoke. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "You look cold." She stared at the coat he offered, lips trembling. "I'm fine," she whispered. "You're not." "I said I'm fine," she repeated, sharper now. but her voice cracked. Grayson didn't push. He simply laid the coat beside her. "Take it if you change your mind." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever need help, real help, call me. Name's Grayson." She didn't answer. He stood, looked at her one last time, and walked away, vanishing into the fog. Evelyn clutched the card with shaking fingers. She didn't know it yet, but her story wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The cold lingered in Evelyn's bones for days after that night. She had almost convinced herself it was a dream, the encounter with Grayson Wolfe. His tailored coat, his gentle voice, and the warmth that radiated from him like something she hadn't felt in years. She'd ignored his card, the one he'd left behind, with an offer of help, as though it was just a polite gesture from a stranger. But pride has a way of shattering, especially when it's held together by nothing but desperation. 2 days later, with nothing left to lose, and a stomach gnawing in hunger, Evelyn found herself standing in front of the Wolfe Foundation's grand glass doors. The towering building felt like a monument to all the things she'd never had. The polished floors, the towering windows, the suits and smiles that never seemed to stop. She hesitated, hand on the handle, before the thought of her empty pockets and the constant ache in her stomach pushed her forward. She stepped inside. The receptionist, a woman in a designer suit, barely looked up from her screen. "Can I help you?" I saw the ad for volunteers," Evelyn said, her voice unsteady. I'm looking for work." The woman's gaze softened for a second, the first sign of interest in her eyes. "Are you a volunteer or looking for a position?" "A position," Evelyn replied, her voice growing firmer with each word. "I need a job." The woman nodded, dialing a number on her phone. "Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Evelyn sank into one of the plush chairs in the lobby, her eyes scanning the room. Everything about the place was polished perfection, an environment that made her feel both out of place and insignificant. She had no real qualifications, no higher education to boast about. What did she have to offer? The minutes stretched on, her nerves getting the best of her. She thought about leaving, but then the door opened, and a man walked in. A tall, broad-shouldered figure, his presence immediately commanding the room. Grayson Wolfe. He was the last person she expected to see, and for a brief moment, she froze. His sharp blue eyes met hers across the room, and for a second, it felt as though time stood still. There was no mistaking the recognition in his gaze. He knew her, but he said nothing. He simply walked toward her with the same calm demeanor he'd had the other night. He stopped in front of her, his gaze softening as he offered a brief, almost imperceptible smile. "Miss Hart," he greeted her, his voice low and reassuring. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, barely above a whisper. She wanted to say something else, something clever, something witty, but the words stuck in her throat. "I see you took my card," he said, his voice warm but careful. "What can I do for you today?" I came for a job," she replied, her nerves now getting the better of her. She hated that she sounded so small in front of him, so powerless. "I need work." Grayson nodded, his expression unreadable. He motioned for her to stand. "Follow me." Without another word, he led her through the sleek corridors of the Foundation's offices. The place was as impressive as it had looked from the outside, modern, elegant, and dripping with success. But it wasn't the building that made Evelyn feel out of place. It was the man leading her, Grayson Wolfe, the man who had given her his coat without asking questions. The man who had taken one look at her broken spirit and not offered pity, but something far more valuable, an opportunity. He stopped in front of an office door and opened it. "This is where you'll be working. It's an entry-level assistant position. But if you prove yourself, there's room for growth." Evelyn blinked in shock. I thought you'd offer me some kind of charity." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "This is no charity, Miss Hart. This is a job, a chance to rebuild. I don't offer pity to anyone, not even you." Her chest tightened at his words, and she quickly turned her eyes to the floor, not wanting him to see how much those words hit her. "I'm not giving you this because I feel sorry for you," Grayson continued, his tone suddenly more intense. "I'm offering you this because I believe you can do something with it. Now, do you want the job or not? Evelyn felt a strange heat flood through her, a mixture of gratitude and something else, something she couldn't place. I, I want it, she whispered, her voice trembling. Good, he said. He didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that made Evelyn feel like she was standing on the edge of something monumental. He handed her a folder with papers inside. This is your schedule, your responsibilities, and the terms. If you can handle this, I'll give you more. If you can't, well then, at least you gave it a shot. She nodded silently, feeling the weight of his words settle deep inside her. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Grayson replied. This is your chance, Evelyn. Make it count. With that, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the sleek, sterile space. She looked down at the papers in her hands, her thoughts a swirl of emotions. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know why Grayson had taken an interest in her, why he'd given her a job. But one thing was clear. She couldn't afford to waste this opportunity. And as the door clicked shut behind her, she knew that this was just the beginning. 22:59, April 5th, 2025. Ayan Awan. Evelyn had been with the Wolf Foundation for a little over a month now. At first, she felt out of place, unsure of herself in the polished halls, the power-wielding suits, and the polished, high-profile people who filled the building every day. But with each passing day, she grew more comfortable. She absorbed knowledge from the best, worked long hours, and proved herself indispensable to the team. Her intelligence and unrelenting dedication began to earn her the respect of her colleagues. And slowly she noticed how Grayson Wolf seemed to take a greater interest in her than anyone else. At first it was small things, a casual conversation about her weekend plans, a quiet question about her favorite books, the way he would occasionally stop by her desk just to hand her a coffee with a handwritten note that said something like, "Hope this helps you get through the day." It wasn't anything extraordinary, yet it was enough to make Evelyn's heart race every time she noticed him paying attention to her. She could sense the sincerity behind his gestures, but there was something more there, something she couldn't place. The way he looked at her sometimes with those piercing blue eyes seemed to go beyond simple professionalism. There was an intensity in his gaze, a depth that hinted at pain, something Evelyn felt drawn to but didn't quite understand. Grayson Wolf, the millionaire tech mogul with the golden touch, the kind of man who could have anyone he wanted, was giving her small glimpses of something far more complex than his polished exterior suggested. But Evelyn, despite the connection she felt, was still careful. She'd learned to be cautious after everything she'd been through. She had nothing left to lose, but she wasn't ready to give away her heart so easily. Not yet. One rainy evening, the office was quieter than usual. The storm outside made the city streets seem distant, muffling the sound of the usual clattering keyboards and ringing phones. Evelyn, deep into organizing a stack of reports, didn't notice the time slip by until she realized the office had nearly emptied out. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as she closed her laptop and started gathering her things. It had been another long day, one of many in her new life, and all she wanted was to get home and get some rest. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint sound coming from Grayson's private office down the hall. His door was slightly ajar, and the dim light from inside spilled out into the hallway. Curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped closer, just in time to see Grayson, seated at his desk, staring at something in his hands, a photograph. Her breath caught. She had never seen him like this, vulnerable, his sharp features softened with the weight of whatever memory he was reliving. His usually composed demeanor was gone, replaced by something raw, something real. His eyes were focused on the picture, lost in thought, unaware of the world around him. Evelyn couldn't help herself. She took a step forward, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, and before she realized it, she was standing in the doorway. Grayson's gaze shot up, locking onto hers instantly. There was a flash of surprise in his eyes, but also something else. Something almost relieved. "Evelyn," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, almost as if he hadn't expected anyone to find him like this. "I didn't hear you come in." "I'm sorry," she said quickly, unsure of how to act. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just saw you from the hallway. Grayson didn't say anything at first. He glanced at the photo in his hands before setting it down on the desk, his fingers brushing the edges of the frame. Evelyn's eyes were drawn to the picture, but she didn't ask what it was. She could tell it was something important to him, something personal. The moment felt intimate, almost fragile. "Who is she?" Evelyn finally asked, her curiosity overcoming her hesitation. Grayson sighed deeply, a sound that was heavy with years of pain. "Her name was Bianca," he said, his voice tight, as though the name itself carried a burden. "She was my fiancée." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, and she stepped closer, unsure of what to say. There was something about the way he spoke, so detached, yet laced with underlying sorrow, that made her feel like she was peering into a wound that had never fully healed. "What happened?" she asked softly. Grayson looked at her, his blue eyes dark with something that she couldn't quite understand. After a long pause, he spoke, the words coming out in a rushed confession, like he had been waiting years to say them. "She used me," he admitted quietly, his voice breaking the air between them. "Used me for my money, my connections. I was everything she needed until she didn't need me anymore. When I lost everything, emotionally, financially, she left. She walked away without a second thought. And he paused, his jaw clenched tight. "I had to rebuild myself from the ground up." Evelyn swallowed hard, her heart aching for him. She had known the weight of loss, the kind that stripped you of everything you once knew. But this betrayal, this kind of heartbreak, was something different. It felt heavy in the air around them, like the past had taken root in the present, and she could see it all in his eyes. "You didn't deserve that," Evelyn said softly, her voice tender. She had always been good at listening, at giving people a space to let go of their pain. But hearing this, Grayson, so vulnerable, so raw, it made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. Grayson didn't look at her for a moment, his gaze dropping to the floor as if to shield himself from her sympathy. But when he finally met her eyes again, there was a flicker of something different in his gaze, something far less guarded. "Thank you for listening," he said quietly, his voice softer now, almost as if he had found solace in her presence. For a moment neither of them spoke. But then instinctively Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it hovered near his. He glanced down at her hand before meeting her eyes again. Without thinking, Evelyn placed her hand over his. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a confession of love. But in that moment, it was something both of them needed. Human connection, understanding, a bond forged in the midst of shared pain. And as Grayson's hand relaxed beneath hers, something unspoken passed between them. A silent agreement that maybe, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. Two broken hearts, slowly learning to trust again. Grayson invited Evelyn to the company's annual gala, not as an assistant, but as his date. It was an offer she couldn't refuse, and when she arrived, she was unrecognizable. Dressed in a midnight blue gown, her beauty shone like never before, and for the first time, she felt like she belonged in this world. Her curls fell perfectly around her shoulders, and the red lipstick she dared to wear made her feel bold and confident. As they entered the gala, Grayson's eyes were fixed on her. He had seen her in various settings before, but this was different. She was different. For the first time, Evelyn could see him looking at her not with sympathy, but with admiration. She felt her heart flutter, knowing that she wasn't just the assistant to him tonight, she was his equal. The night was filled with glimmering lights and laughter as the two of them moved through the crowd. The chemistry between them was undeniable. When they shared their first dance, it felt as if time had slowed down. The music, the voices, the whole world seemed to blur, and all Evelyn could focus on was Grayson's touch. She could feel the warmth of his hand on her back, the strength in his arms as they moved together in perfect harmony. Just as Grayson leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a voice interrupted them. "Grayson, darling," the voice said with a sweetness that didn't match the venom beneath it. Evelyn's heart sank as she turned and saw Bianca, Grayson's ex-fiancée. Bianca was flawless in every sense, and she didn't hesitate to make her presence known. "Isn't it just lovely," she sneered, To see the great Grayson Wolf bringing a charity case to a gala? Evelyn froze, the words slicing through her like a knife. She wanted to run, to escape, but she couldn't. Bianca's eyes were sharp, her smirk cold. Evelyn could feel every inch of her old life rising to the surface. The pain of being judged for who she was, for what she had lost. Grayson's jaw tightened, and for a second, Evelyn saw the rage flash in his eyes. But before he could say anything, Bianca's cruel words echoed again, cutting through the air. Grayson, what is this? Another project for you to rescue? The stinging words had Evelyn's face flushing with embarrassment. She could feel every eye in the room on her, and the weight of their judgment was too much. She turned on her heel, her steps quick and frantic as she rushed out of the ballroom. Grayson followed, calling her name. But Evelyn couldn't stop. She had heard those words before, always from people who pitied her, always reminding her of everything she had lost. She couldn't bear it anymore. Outside, the cool night air didn't stop the tears from coming. She had tried so hard to escape her past, but tonight, it felt like it was pulling her back into a place she didn't want to be. Grayson finally caught up to her, but it was too late. The damage had been done. With her heart in pieces, Evelyn walked away, leaving behind the gala and the man who had made her feel like someone worth loving. The next morning, Evelyn was gone. She left no note, no explanation, just an empty desk, the space where her presence used to be. Grayson stood in the office, staring at her vacant chair, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't understand it. One moment, they had shared the best night of their lives. The next, she was gone. His mind raced. Had he said something wrong at the gala? Had Bianca's cruel words driven her away? He tried to convince himself it wasn't his fault, but the unease gnawed at him. Unable to sit still, Grayson took action. He canceled meetings with key clients, ignored emails from investors, and spent sleepless nights trying to contact Evelyn, to no avail. It wasn't just about losing an employee anymore. It was about losing her. His heart, which had been cautiously sealed off for so long, felt like it was being torn open by an invisible force. He hired a private investigator, scouring every corner of Charleston for any sign of her. Days turned into weeks, and Grayson's obsession only deepened. The thought of her, alone and hurting, haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was slipping further away from him, and he wasn't sure if he would ever find her again. Meanwhile, Evelyn had disappeared into a life that had nothing to do with the wealth and glittering facade Grayson had come to represent. She found solace at a women's shelter in Savannah, a humble place where she volunteered her time, helping others find their footing. The women there didn't pity her. They saw her strength, her resilience. It was the first time in months that Evelyn felt like she was more than just a victim of her past. She spent her days teaching young girls how to rebuild their confidence, offering them the compassion and understanding that she had longed for herself. The girls adored her, and in return, Evelyn found a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't Evelyn Hart, the woman with nothing. She was Evelyn, someone who could make a difference. But fate, as it often does, has a strange way of pulling people back together when they least expect it. One rainy afternoon, as the shelter buzzed with activity, a figure stepped through the door. Evelyn looked up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Grayson standing there, drenched from the rain, his blue eyes searching the room. He had come, not with business in mind, but with a purpose, to find her. He had donated to the shelter before, under a pseudonym, but this time, he wasn't just handing over money. He was looking for her, knowing she would be there. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The noise around them faded away, and it was just the two of them standing in the middle of the room, silent, holding the weight of the moment between them. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Grayson took a step forward, but this time, he didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The pain in his eyes spoke louder than any apology he could offer. He had come for her, not to rescue her, not to pity her, but to find the woman he had unknowingly fallen in love with. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as she stepped closer, the years of hurt, the fears of abandonment, all crashing over her at once. She had tried to forget him, tried to distance herself from the world that had once held her captive. But in that moment, standing in front of Grayson, She realized that her heart had never truly let him go. She reached out, her hands trembling, and for the first time in weeks, Grayson's arms enveloped her. No more words were needed, just the raw emotion of a love that had endured through pain and silence. And as they stood there, the rain pouring outside, neither of them could deny that their paths had crossed for a reason, one they were finally ready to understand. Grayson stood at the shelter's doorway, holding nothing but the weight of truth. No grand gestures, no diamond apologies, just honesty. When Evelyn stepped into view, her arms crossed and her eyes sharp, he spoke first. I failed you that night. I should have stood between you and the past that tried to break you. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She met his gaze head on. I don't need rescuing, Grayson. I've done that part myself. He nodded slowly, stepping closer. Then let me stand beside you, not in front of your pain, but beside your strength. Her expression softened, just slightly. I don't want love that feels like charity, she whispered. I want something real. Grayson reached into his coat pocket, not for flowers, but for an old worn sketch. A pencil drawing of the moment he first saw her, sitting alone outside the bookstore. I see you, Evelyn, he said. Not the story, you. That was the moment her guard began to lower. They didn't fall into each other's arms, but they walked side by side towards something new. Over quiet dinners and long drives down tree-lined roads, they began again. No paparazzi, no pressure, just presence. Grayson showed her pieces of his world, the ones no one else had ever seen. A hidden garden he cultivated behind one of his oldest properties. A room filled with canvases and unfinished charcoal sketches. And a piano he hadn't touched in years. You still play? She asked one rainy evening. Not since before Bianca, he admitted. I didn't see the point. She smiled, gently placing his hand on the keys. Then play. For you. As his fingers found the chords again, Evelyn sat beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. That night they didn't speak of the past. They simply existed, together. Their love didn't bloom like fireworks. It grew quietly, steadily, like roots finding soil. She was no longer the broken girl from the ashes, and he was no longer the guarded man hiding behind success. They were equals now. Two souls finding power not in rescue, but in recognition. The old bookstore where Evelyn once sat in the cold had come back to life, rebuilt from ashes, just like her. It was now called Heart's Haven, named in memory of her mother. The wooden sign above the door shimmered in soft gold letters. Inside, rows of books lined freshly painted shelves, and warm string lights wrapped around the walls, giving the space a quiet, magical glow. Grayson stood in the poetry section, dressed in a dark wool coat, holding a small velvet box. His heart raced, not from nerves, but from certainty. Evelyn arrived minutes later, her hair softly curled, her eyes curious and unsuspecting. When she stepped inside, she froze, her breath catching at the sight of him. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. I saw you here first, he said, voice low and steady. Alone, broken, beautiful. Evelyn blinked away sudden tears as he opened the box. The ring inside was simple but timeless, a silver band wrapped around a single, brilliant stone. Her hand trembled as he gently took it. I built empires, Grayson whispered, but none of them mattered until you. I want to build a life, with you. She looked down at the ring, then up at him. A long silence stretched, full of unspoken memories and rebuilt hope. I lost everything that night, she finally whispered, slipping the ring onto her finger. But I found the one thing I never had, a love that sees me. They didn't kiss. They just held each other tightly in the quiet bookstore, letting time fold around them like pages in a story only they could write. Their wedding took place beneath a canopy of twinkling lights strung across an open garden. It wasn't extravagant. It was intimate and honest. Evelyn wore a gown the color of dusk, soft and flowing, while wildflowers braided through her hair. Children from the shelter she'd mentored scattered petals ahead of her as she walked down the aisle. Grayson waited at the altar, tears glimmering in his blue eyes. His suit was sharp, but his expression was soft. When he saw her, time seemed to freeze again. They exchanged no rehearsed vows, just quiet, heartfelt promises. "I'll never let you stand alone again," he said, taking her hands. "And I'll never let fear decide my future," she replied, her voice steady. Their kiss was met with soft applause and joyful tears. Guests smiled through sobs. The shelter staff, Wolf Foundation employees, even the most skeptical investors, saw something in them that money could never buy. In the back, standing alone in a designer dress, Bianca watched, not out of love, but out of loss. The empire she chased had no heart, and that night, for the first time, she knew it. But the story didn't end with wedding bells. Evelyn launched a nonprofit initiative through Heart's Haven, aimed at helping homeless and abused women rebuild their lives. Grayson stepped away from headlines and boardrooms, choosing to quietly fund and support her dream. They spent evenings cooking together, mornings reading in the garden, and weekends at the shelter with women who saw Evelyn not as a victim, but as a symbol of strength. They didn't rise because of money. They rose because love, true, raw, imperfect love, had pulled them from ashes into forever. And that was the real beginning.